I want to welcome Joko Falk on stage, somebody that describes himself as a senior corporate tiger turned entrepreneur and a long-term and loyal Texylvania supporter. And I'll let him introduce the topic and his fellow panelists. Thank you so much, Joko.
You're welcome.
Thank you. You need to turn it on. So we're talking about artificial intelligence, but the hardest is to the microphone.
Thank you very much. Welcome here today. Lots of people were highly interested in hybrid intelligence. Is that now a hype, or is that now a fact? What is real, what is not? And for that, you don't want to listen to me. You want to listen to two experts. And the first expert is Executive Director of C4ADS. How you were welcome. And then a professor of neurocomputation and neurosurgery. Welcome, and please have it stated. So that is a lot of brain. And first question is going to be, so truth or hype? What does it even mean, truth and hype?
So the challenge is that hype is the social capital that a product or service gets through marketing, with the idea of creating this wave of public interest in the product or service. When we start talking about truth, you're really more talking about engineering and the ecosystem that will allow that product or service to actually come to market. So when I look at things and I'm trying to decide at C4ADS whether we're going to use this as basic science or applied science, we look at it and we say, is this at least technology readiness level 8, having been proven in a relevant environment with a prototype actually out there, or not? Now, even that might not be truth, because I think one of the lessons we've heard from many of the other speakers out here is we all came here thinking we were going to talk about technology and products. But we hear an awful lot about how do we get that product over the hump into the market space, how do we turn it into something else, and it's more about people than technology and products. So you have the social environment, the financial environment, you have a competitive landscape, you have government regulation. All of these things can prevent really feasible, hopeful technologies from never impacting the lives of people within the world or country. So I think it's very important that we try and understand that we want to talk about the things that have been built as truth, not what could happen, what's not out there yet in the market space, and those things that have been built that have the capacity to make it to market. And that's really the biggest challenge here, I think, at Texylvania that we've kind of discussed across all of the panels. Anyway, with that said, my good friend Dr. ni2o Howard actually builds, technology in the artificial intelligence space. Yeah. And one of the challenges there often is that people misname it as automation of a problem rather than having the machine learning generate its own rules. Or in hybrid intelligence, you have two definitions out there. One is this more marketing or ecosystem-driven definition that says it's about the joining of a human and a machine to create exponential effects to make both of them better. Then the other definition is it's about symbolic and sub-symbolic language, and it would be an artificial intelligence that could reason across deductive, inductive, abductive, or analogy, and link those systems together in the same way that humans do. So at C4ADS, we do machine learning, computer visualization, apply those into intelligence efforts across a wide variety of illicit networks, and we also do the ecosystem version of hybrid intelligence. But it is not just the human on the loop, because just a human on the loop is, well, we're already training machine learning, so how is that different, So like I said, Dr. Howard builds the actual products and is moving these things to market, and so he's probably the best person to talk to about that particular aspect.
Yeah, so ni2o, enlighten us. And what's really out there? What's real?
So the world of AI, or the actual term, came out in the mid-50s, and interestingly it was referring to the challenge between a human and machine, and whether you can take this property of a human known as intelligence and manifest it through a machine system and then not being able to discern the difference. Over time, we learned that it plagued the concept, or the way that it was applied. It's plagued with challenges and consequential things. Like, for example, if you were to test Einstein's brain and you subject him to the standard classical IQ test, then you would come up with a person who is less intelligent, less endowed with intelligence. Reason for that is that we're following certain procedures that things like in Einstein's brain was not following. That led us to interesting areas in the late, actually 2000, with Marvin Minsky at MIT. We tried to regroup AI and revisit the whole concept. And we come up with several emerging concepts like human intelligence, general intelligence, synthetic intelligence, and each one represented its own challenges and its own question sets, if you will. A small group of my team, we said the supreme artifacts of intelligence to us is the brain. And we must go and pursue things that identify new principles of how this brain, or how the brain operates and how it works, to include understanding the distinction between a functional brain, an optimally functional brain, and a suboptimal functional brain. Let's call the suboptimal functional brain is a brain with disorders, that is plagued with a slew of disorders that we don't know how to resolve because we are still stuck on the chemical brain. And migrate from there to understand that the brain is actually a machine that operates in chemical processing space, in electrophysiological or electrical processing space, and in optogenetics or optical processing space. And that each one represents its own principles with respect to issues of power and processing and issues of, as we call it, AI. We sub-drilled into that and we start saying, well, let's look at the augmentation of the human brain and the interface between a human brain and a machine. Would a marriage between a machine that augment the sensory processes, the functional processes, the structural space, and the behavioral outcome would be something that beneficial to humanity. And then from there, we started looking into chipsets and structural objects that manifest AI, culminating on the creation of a company called ni2o, neurons input output, where we actually make such chips and integrate them with the human brain. And we've been fascinated with the results and outcome. That in itself suggests an opening to a whole other area that has to do with quantum intelligence. And the description and the articulation of what is quantum intelligence defies the properties of classical and notational physics as we know it. But let me bring this down a notch and actually bring it to the more applied areas that implemented in organizations like C4ADS, and then have Dave talk about that for a little bit.
So now we have, this is getting really, really real. We're really close to actually solving diseases. So what is sort of the sequence of things? So are we first going to solve some diseases, and then we're going to get to some of the cool stuff? They say, oh, let's accelerate our brains. And, right. We talked a little bit about yesterday. You say, well, you can do high school actually in maybe a couple of months. Right. How far is that reality off? What is the sequence of things that we can expect?
The concept of brain augmentation and brain prosthetic and DPS, deep brain stimulation, BCI, brain-computer interfaces, it's a concept of today, and it exists. And there was a former person on the stage presenting such technologies as well. There's approximately 50 companies in the US alone that is going after that space with all sort of things. And then taking it to the merits of the discussion the truth and hype, as David was talking about. What I do like about the universe that we exist in is principles like physics and mathematical rules. And generally, when people hype the area by deciding that they're going to deliver power in a space of a projection of power of 140 hertz for approximately millivolts and lower than that without any targeting path, that would be generally categorized as hype because it defies and bends the laws of physics as we know it.
Yeah.
And without any kind of introductory foundational understanding of how they managed to achieve such a thing. Things like people in AI, general AI, where they're completely frightened. You know, it was an article not too long ago about Google becoming alive, and another person who his Excel spreadsheet was talking to him. I mean, that's, you know, that's not necessarily science. That's not factual. And as a result, it causes people who are actually working in that space, who want to contribute valuable things and advance valuable things, to be more afraid, to say the least, and pull back on their efforts of doing that. So hype versus reality is really important, whether it's in the brain, machine interfaces, in the brain, brain stimulation, or in the classic AI as a discipline.
Yeah. So hype versus reality is very clear when it comes to physics, right? So if something is physically just impossible, clear, okay, hype. But you know, having lived through the .com, for instance, you know, 2 decades ago, and some of us may have done the same, there was the .com hype. And on one hand, you could say there was a hype. On the other hand, a lot of what was hype then is totally reality now, right? But at the time, we called it hype. And some of the things that were reality now are slowly now becoming hyped. And so it's a fungible concept. So what is in this space, you know, what do you expect as sort of real in the upcoming years?
Yeah, I think that, you know, Dr. Howard's fairly modest about some of the companies he's already built and the products that are already out there for autonomous vehicles, for, you know, brain-computer interface processors that are being in production, and even during COVID for sensors that could check for, you know, viral infection through saliva very, very rapidly and save everybody's nose a little bit of pain, you know. But those things that are in production, they're actually out there, and there's a lot of, like you said, there are up to 50 companies competing in that space. Frequently, because of the way that marketing works, you end up with people who are trying to raise money on something they want to build that is theoretically feasible, but isn't built yet. So to raise money, they'll generate what we used to call at Intel Corporation vaporware. You know, it's a slideshow. It's not really actually built yet, but it fires people up enough that they might give you money to actually build it. And that would be hype. You know, whereas eventually if they are able to raise the money, like Dr. Howard has over the years, and build the company and then, you know, get it approved, regulated appropriately, and then go through the processes of human testing, which is always a challenge, and then have a product out there that's a prototype in a relevant environment, meaning being used by a human, not in the lab. Well, then you're definitely there. There you're in reality. There you've actually, you know, made a difference in the world, and you're across the chasm. You may not be selling 1 billion of them yet, but you've already built something that works and is able to be grown as a business, rather than just vaporware. Now, at C480S, we have a practical need with a set of problems, you know, basically intelligence problems, understanding the behavior of illicit networks and how they embed themselves in legal systems of trade, transportation, and finance. And that means that we're trying to perform most of the functions as an NGO that an intelligence agency would do or an investigative journalistic organization would do. By using massive amounts of trade data, we partner with Amazon Web Services, with Palantir, and a number of other technology firms to empower really smart analysts. Like a great rider on a stallion. When you get great technology, if you have a weak rider, you get the right answer to the wrong question and you run right off the track. But when you have a great analyst who's now you're going to empower with this technology, you start to see the outlines of where the ecosystem hybrid intelligence can go. Yes, you're still at human on the loop. To say there's hybrid intelligence, that we're using that at C4ADS would be hype. Now, AI, we generally don't see it, so pure AI, you have to pass the singularity. What everybody's calling AI now is really machine learning, computer visualization, it's deep machine learning. And for us, we use AI, but we use XAI, explainable AI, because the product still has to have a human decision on the other end, and trust the computer is not an answer. So, if somebody were to say, here, this is what people are saying across 50,000 tweets, the judge would say, print them out and have a certified translation, please. So when you start having, AI help us do things, we have to be sure that we can follow that path. So oftentimes we're using stuff that's truth, random forest, which is like an open source tool set that lots of people check and play with because you can follow the pathways. But it's not anywhere near how good the stuff can be. So we're still working at that level of how do we integrate this into real world problems, but that's truth. It's being done. Right? Dr. Howard, you got anything?
The fundamental problem with how AI is being applied in today's market is that we don't really see true artificial intelligence, synthetic intelligence, general intelligence, or any form of what manifests itself as the phenomena of intelligence. What we do see is a tool that people augment and get to a point of worshiping it because it's becoming a cash engine. Marketing and advertising has been very much where the majority of AI is being applied. If AI was to be asked, I'd like you to tell me what is the best triage of surveillance on the bombardments of Mother Earth with meteorites, I think that would probably get you about this much in funding. 0. But if you were doing advertising and marketing and something that sells space vacations, that's one thing that would probably get you a lot of funding. Therefore, the tools would all go in that direction. That generates the hype that we don't want to see in AI, and we want to actually empower the new concepts and new direction of people looking, for example, at the brain as a quantum machine, as opposed to, let's look at the data that's coming from the brain and figure out how I can operate with large data sets to find also advertising cues or clues, whatnot. So.
Yeah,
I'd like to add a little bit there in the sense that you're talking products and what gets funded, and it's so true because when I look at the challenges that I face or my organization faces, and we would use AI for deep machine learning tool sets to do descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analysis. You see so much AI applied in product space, like facial recognition. Whereas if I was really thinking about my problem set, if I could use an AI to do what AI does best, which will be massive amounts of data, moving rapidly, need an answer now, then I would be saying what I want for AI is I want them at the data management layer. Find me the new website that pops up with this data in milliseconds, because the internet, the infosphere of the world is massively dynamic. There's no way to do traditional science where you know that you have a representative sample of the whole, because that whole is constantly changing. Governments used to try and gather all the data and then look for a pattern. Guess what? You'll never gather all the data. Forget it. But AI can help you spot when that infosphere is changing and pull in the data sets that are relevant even as they change and keep up within milliseconds. Now, that would be a great actual use for AI. Do I think there's a ton of money in it? I'm pretty sure that the guy who made FindFace in Russia made a lot of money. But I'm not so sure there's a lot of money in what I'm describing yet.
But so the use of AI, then let's say outside the human body, it's immediately applicable. But how far off are we when you say, okay, there's a little voice in my head that says there's a new website opened up there, and I need to have a look at it. That sounds like it's already quite close.
That's spot on. I think it's a pretty good question.
There's an experiment that was done recently. About 5 nations. They basically collaborated over having 2 human brains telepathically talk to each other. And the experiment succeeded.
3D?
The experiment succeeded in actually being able to, the way the descriptor of that experiment was that they would be focusing on, one person would be focusing on one letter or a word, and the other person is wired to the same type of machine using particular wave length and BCI, non-intrusive. And the other person immediately recognizes the letter and the character, and it was it has achieved 80% accuracy in that detection, which suggests a huge leap in that area. That's the kind of AI that we don't hear about a lot, right? And that's the kind of AI that is true AI, that it actually mimics and works like true intelligence, like the true apparatus that we refer to as intelligence.
I can see some real-world applications. I mean, if tonight we're at the Texavania sort of big party, it's going to be very noisy. And I can see if the two of us would have that kind of a plug-in, we could just have a conversation and still have the music, right? So I can see some real-world applications here.
Yeah, even better, if you go to one of those bottle bars where everybody's rocking with electro music, you can talk to your girlfriend.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Perfect, yeah.
Do you want to?
First I heard, so you have very different approaches to the same subject, which undoubtedly leads to different sort of opinions also about the subject. So where do you sort of disagree?
So I'm the cynic. So as he already pointed out, he basically just went into hype mode for me. Where, I mean, yes, there was an experiment. Cool. And it implies these things are going to happen. Okay. And are we sure we're not going to get regulation a la Asimov's iRobot before that happens, and governments are going to stop this thing from ever being developed?
Yeah.
Nope. We're not sure yet.
Yeah.
So I would consider it, yes, there's much in the world that is possible. And it's almost like Jules Verne. If you can imagine it somewhere in the future, it could happen.
Yeah.
The question becomes, what are the pathways through the maze that'll make it happen? And like I said about this whole Texavania conference, my takeaway from talking with speaker after speaker is that it's not the technology that you've built, it's not the product, it's how you get it to market, it's the ecosystem that you're working in that includes production, transportation. I hearken back as old as I am to Betamax, versus VHS. Yeah. Which one was the better technology? It didn't win. Yeah. The one with the better distribution system won.
Yeah. Yeah. And your take?
Yeah, generally, independent of talking about AI in the world of startups, when you have significant progress on engineering, it does not necessarily mean that you won the battle. You have to have a balance between engineering and the business class of operation, marketing, sales, and whatnot, to get to success. I wish there was an AI that would tell you what is this appropriate equilibrium. Are you ripe enough? Have you succeeded and actually come out of the red risk category and ready to exit or ready for the next phase? That would be true intelligence, because true intelligence draw information from almost no information environment. True intelligence, as you try to model it in cars and whatnot, doesn't come an inch close to how true vision is being processed. You need radar, LiDAR, and vision processing to get the car to see the obstacle space that you're in. But then comes the decision making. You're presented with an nth number of decisions, and you're going to make the most optimal, sensible, ethical, proper decision every second, every millisecond you're sitting in that car.
But this is kind of contrary to the way evolution has actually happened. So the human brain is unique, and the reason we do what we do is because we're able to deal with a lack of information very well, because we satisfice, we don't optimize. I think that was Hosseini, right?
Yeah.
But the idea is we don't optimize. Sometimes you're not looking for the best solution, you're looking for the one that gives you option acceleration.
Yeah.
And so that's really one of the challenges is, yes, there's a lot that's out there, but the human brain is still,
Yeah, happiness.
but it evolved that way, and it didn't do it by optimizing.
Right. In programming space, you got to try to do a convex optimization, all kind of other optimization techniques to get to the best solution. The brain doesn't work like that. But yet, if we understood how it works and drive to these principles, we might be able to get to a next level of engineering, get to the next level of technological advances that is beyond what we are actually stuck in today. Sending a tube up to orbital sphere and then bring it back and think that firing about 9 of these have achieved a successful understanding of space. In my opinion, it's a setback for human achievement. If you actually program the machine with these parameters, it might likely to come up with better ideas. Only if it's operating in true AI.
So to bring it back to Earth, one of the challenges is that governments do a few things well. And one of those is moonshots where there's no money involved, and the other is massive weapon systems like aircraft carriers. But other than that, everything is really driven by incentive. And that's a financial incentive that's driving a lot of the competition that enhances the quality of human life. So while all these things are possible because they would be cool if they happened, the question is, where are the incentives that you're going to be able to leverage to get there? And also, the amount of fear that comes about through hype that could be misinterpreted. That's going to be the things that cause regulation. And governments don't make things happen. They prevent things from happening. Lawyers slow things down. That's what they do. So they're a brake on innovation and everything else. So the question becomes, how do we avoid triggering fear, which can cause us to be set back for months and years?
Another aspect of that kind of a coin is it depends highly on which location you are in this Earth and which government you need to deal with, what kind of regulations are there. And you both come from a country that is relatively well regulated, but there's other countries that say, you know what, let's go ahead, let's just give it a try. And so there are some dangers in there, but of course from a scientific perspective, maybe there's also some benefits in there. So how do you see that from maybe the scientific perspective and then maybe from the regulation perspective?
I think scientifically speaking, it's been a challenge of multi-centuries. I mean, in the old days, a scientist or an artist would go to the court of the ruler and pitch their idea. It really hasn't changed much. The same thing right now. You go to the court of the VC and you pitch the idea and then hope that they would be sympathetic to the cause and support you. So I don't have a solution to that one.
No,
I think that's about language, right? So I can't tell you how many CTOs, chief technical officers, fail because the product is not what the venture capital person is interested in. They're interested in return on investment.
Yeah.
So you need to put your business or sales guy forward because as far as VC is concerned, it could be potato chips.
Yeah.
So you figure the audience out and you have to do what you have to do in order to get that product out to where it needs to be.
Yeah. Well, I, for one, hope you time things very carefully because I'm setting up a tutoring business now and I'm going to be completely out of business when you implant and say, you know what, you're done in 2 weeks with your high school, so I'm out of business, so warn me when that happens. Right now, thank you very much. I would like to continue this session in the Q&A room. So those of you who have questions and would like to explore this space a little bit further, the three of us will move to the Q&A room, which is just up here, and we'll be entertaining some questions and furthering this discussion. So see some of you there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.